Welcome to An Author's Journey, where a prominent author chats with us about their journey as a writer. I'm your host, Joe Pizzo. Today's featured guest is Ruta Sepetys, who is an accomplished speaker and author. She is also one of the kindest individuals you will ever have the pleasure to meet. And I speak from personal experience. An internationally acclaimed #1 New York Times best-selling author of historical fiction, published in over 60 countries and 40 languages. Ruta Sepetys is considered a crossover novelist, as her books are read by both students and adults worldwide. Winner of the Carnegie Medal. Ruta is renowned for giving voice to underrepresented history and those who have experienced it. Her books have won or been shortlisted for over 40 book prizes, are included on over 30 state reading lists, and are currently in development for film and television. Ruta is the daughter of a Lithuanian refugee, and her family is very important to her, and family overall is a very important thing for Ruta. Born in Michigan, she was raised in a family of artists, readers, and music lovers. Ruta's passion for the power of history and story fosters the global dialogue and connectivity she facilitates through her writing. She has been invited to present at NATO, the European Parliament, the U.S. Capitol, the Library of Congress, and embassies worldwide. She was awarded the Rockefeller Foundation's prestigious Bellagio Fellowship for her studies on human resilience. The New York Times Book Review declared, Ruta Sepetys acts as champion of the interstitial people so often ignored, whole populations lost in the cracks of history, unquote. Ruta was bestowed the Cross of the Knight of the Order by the President of Lithuania for her contributions to education and memory preservation. Recently, she was honored with a postage stamp containing her image. She is extremely proud to be of Baltic heritage, even as she notes that she has a name that few can pronounce, at least pronounce correctly. Presently, Ruta lives with her family in the hills of Tennessee. Her book, The Fountains of Silence, deals with the struggles of the people living under the dictatorship of Spanish ruler Francisco Franco. I Must Betray You examines the challenges faced by 17-year-old Christian, who risks everything to unmask the truth behind the regime, give voice to fellow Romanians, and expose to the world what is happening in his country, controlled by the dictator Nicolae Ceausescu. Winner of the Carnegie Medal. Salt to the Sea demonstrates how, even in desperate times, the people of Lithuania, Poland, and East Prussia can prevail in the most desperate of times. Bookrags.com describes Out of the Easy as, quote, a young adult novel which follows 17-year-old Josie Moraine's efforts to get out from under the shadow of her mother's work as a prostitute, to leave New Orleans, and to attend college in Massachusetts, unquote. Between Shades of Grey fictionally chronicles the cruelty faced by many Lithuanians, Estonians, and Latvians after the Soviet Union annexed and occupied the Baltic states in 1940. Thousands were deported and many imprisoned in Siberian forced labor camps. Marius Gudinas, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Lithuania, says that, quote, Ruta Sepetys is one of the best world ambassadors for human dignity. Her fight for fundamental human values, for democracy and liberty, deserve the highest respect, recognition, and gratitude, unquote. It is indeed my honor and my privilege to welcome To chat with us, Ruta Sepetys. She's here to take an author's journey today. Ruta, thank you so much for joining us. We are honored to listen to you.
Joe, thank you for that beautiful introduction, for having me. The honor is mine, I assure you. I'm so excited to chat with you.
I know our listeners want to get as much information from you and share as much of your wisdom as they can. So I'm going to jump right to that first question.
Great.
What is your motivation for being a writer of precisely accurate historical fiction? I know the accuracy means a lot to you, but how did that all come about?
It does mean a lot to me. And thank you for, mentioning not only historical fiction, but the accurate aspect, because as you know, I spend years researching my books. And the reason behind it is that when I began writing, I realized that there are so many human beings who have a family background or historical background that they feel is misunderstood. Maybe they, like my family, they come from Lithuania, a country that people don't know much about. And when history remains hidden in the shadows, the people who experienced it, sometimes they feel forgotten. And so those are the stories that I'm really trying to illuminate. I want to shine light in those darker corners of history. But because I'm writing about history that I myself didn't experience, it is crucial that I try to remain as authentic and accurate as possible.
Do you find that you have to use a variety of sources and maybe check the same concept, idea, event multiple times to be sure that the accuracy is in place?
Oh, absolutely. And that not only happens with research where I'm fact checking. What was the actual weather on the day that I'm writing about? Was it raining or was the sun shining? But then also in my interview process, if I interview, let's say 75 to 100 people, I'll ask most of them, probably some similar questions to see if I'm getting similar answers. And when I speak of those particular questions, not about their personal feelings, but about, let's say, an event that they experienced and what they experienced. And that also helps inform the authenticity. If 60% of the people I interview tell me the exact same thing, because as we know, memory can be a treacherous thing, right? And we can rebuild those narratives. But so I look for those responses of majority during the interviews.
Now, checking all of these facts gives you the opportunity to put them into a context. And I know that you've mentioned on more than one occasion how there is a tone that's important in your writing, and there is a sound that's important in your writing. And before we started this conversation, when we were doing our preparation, you talked to me a little bit about music and how music is important to you and how it's influenced what you write, the manner in which you write, and the sound with which you write. Could you tell our audience a little bit more about that, please?
Sure. And I can, peel back a few layers as well and let them know that before I became a novelist, I spent 22 years working in the music business. I owned an artist management firm and I represented the careers of songwriters and artists and musicians and rock bands. And I learned in that work the power of melody and rhythm. And you and your listeners might not remember one thing I say as we chat, but tonight you might hear a song that you haven't heard in 5 years and you can sing every word. And that's because melody and rhythm are so powerful. And I feel that that's something that might often be overlooked in writing, in novels, certainly not in poetry. I feel like poets have a good grasp of rhythm and melody, but in novels. And so I try to inject those melodic elements into my work. And I find that at some events, readers come to me and they'll recite a sentence or two back from something. And it's not my writing that they're remembering. It's the rhythm and the melody of it. So for the writers out there, please don't forget the power of rhythm and melody and try to inject it wherever you can.
It's important that you say that because I know that when actors have to remember lots of lines in a short amount of time, especially the people who appear on the running serials that are filmed maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 episodes in one day. That it's a lot of script to remember. One of their techniques is to sing the script, to sing their lines, and that helps them to remember it. Uh, I also think that with your writing, when you're taking informational writing, which can be very dry, and you are putting a melody to it, maybe that's the reason as many people remember it as they do, because you have brought them the musicality to explain the event. It's almost like an opera.
Well,
where you not only see the action, but you hear it.
Well, think about it though. I think every human being has a musicality about us, and when someone imitates us, what they're imitating it's our rhythm and our flow, and that's what they're actually imitating. And so as I'm creating characters, I always tell myself, as you said, history sometimes can be sterile. Make it human. Make it human. And when we have those human rhythms and melodies, I think the reader connects with the character in a deeper way. And that's when a statistic becomes a human being. And that's always the goal. Make it human.
Did you find that when you were writing the different novels, that there was one character whose music was just right on pitch, almost a beautiful, maybe the most beautiful music that you were able to create through this character?
There are two characters that come instantly to mind. One is from my novel, Salt to the Sea, the character of the shoe poet. This is an elderly man who has seen, the book takes place during World War II. He was alive during the First World War. He has seen so much and experienced so many symphonies, let's say. And he brings his wisdom through in this melodic way. He's a shoemaker and he has a mantra. The shoes tell the story. And he was so musical to me. The second character is from my book, The Fountains of Silence, which is set in Madrid in the 50s in Spain. And there's a character, and this might sound odd, but there's a character who is actually quite a silent character. He's not very verbal, but he's so expressive and so musical in his silence, if that makes sense. And so the character of Rafa, Fuga rather, from The Fountains of Silence, and the shoe poet from Salt to the Sea.
Have you found that there are some things, whether it's because they're personal or that they're just a difficult topic to write about, that you struggle more because you feel that pain more than any other situation might bring to you? There are things that I know some authors will just feel totally exhausted after writing certain pieces because the pain felt by those characters drains their own energy from them.
I do find that, and I'm often asked if I shy away from writing those type of scenes or avoid them, and I don't. In fact, I work up my courage and I take a deep breath and I lean into those scenes, because I feel that it's that emotion that is going to bring the reader to the page and keep them there, and as we said, to make the scene seem authentic. However, in Between Shades of Grey, which was inspired by the experience of my father's extended family. My father fled from Lithuania, spent 9 years in refugee camps before coming to the United States. But his extended family had been arrested and deported to death camps and gulags and labor camps in Siberia. And in writing it, knowing, Joe, that my freedom perhaps came at the expense of my extended family members.
Yes.
In Siberia. That was a different dynamic and a different emotion of just feeling, let's just say, a heaviness, this almost, a survivor guilt. But working through that, I assured myself, I am not the only one who feels this way. I cannot be the only one. And I think often we have that illusion of separation where we feel, oh, we might be separate, we might be alone. We are never alone. And in writing Between Shades of Gray, it actually helped me understand and process my own family story in a more profound way. Because once I began touring, people came to the events who shared the exact same family history as me, shared the exact sentiments, the same sadness, the same sorrow, the same gratitude. And so I remind myself, when I'm feeling these things, I am not alone. I am not alone. And I know that writing is often considered a solitary endeavor. But for me, it's not. I set out to help tell other people's stories, but inevitably, in doing that, it leads me to my own story each and every time.
Has there been a story that you've tried to write, but you just can't get your hands around it, and maybe you've put it off a little bit until something else happens, or you find out something else, that one that you want to do, but it's just not ready yet?
Yes, that not only happens for projects, but it also happens then within a novel where I have to write a scene and I am just not getting the scene. In terms of projects, I have been researching a project about country that after World War II, was ruled by communism, and I just can't find. I haven't found yet the right in for that story. There are competing threads. I'm not sure, and I don't fight it. I let it sit. I let it percolate, and I find that in allowing that room to breathe, and if I just sit and listen, those little whispers, the answers will come and help me sort of find my way in. With when I'm struggling within a project, in Between Shades of Gray, for example, I don't want to give any spoilers, but there's a scene where a character does not survive. And I avoided writing that scene until I woke up in the middle of the night and I knew exactly how to express it. And I knew all of a sudden not only how to express it, but why I had been waiting and what the block was. So I really believe in just pausing. If we're patient, then we're present, and then we're listening, and then in that quiet is when we can find the answers and find our way sometimes.
I think your answers are very honest, and it's well appreciated, because one of the things that writers who are in their beginning stages find it hard to understand is that you can take a step back. You can pause for a while. I wish when we taught writing in schools that there was a way where we didn't have so many deadlines, that we had alternatives and ideas could flourish, and we encouraged portfolios a whole lot more, and looking at development more than looking at test scores and that type of performance. I think we do sometimes ourselves a great disservice with that.
I agree with you. And it was one of the pieces of advice that I received early on, that I should, when I'm working on a draft, I should put it aside for a while and come back to it. And that seemed ridiculous to me. I've got momentum, I'm going, and I want to finish this. I'm going to finish the book. But setting aside your piece of writing for a while, when you come back to it, whether it's a week or 2 weeks or 2 years, you will look at it, as with different eyes. You'll see things you didn't see, and you'll be inspired in a whole new way. And I do that now with each book. I set it aside. I set the draft aside and I come back to it.
The books that you write have a social message. and they deal with compromise politically, and they deal with individuals having their liberties taken away and injustices being foisted upon them, and difficulties being introduced into their lives that in many cases are not necessary, but they're more the result of someone's control and power rather than actions in a best social interest. So I guess this is the time for me to ask you, do you see yourself as a champion of justice or as a removed reporter giving the facts?
Oh, interest, probably somewhere in between. That I want to give more than just the facts. I want to interest readers in an underrepresented topic to such an extent that they will then not only pursue the story themselves to research and discover this hidden history, but maybe give thought to their own personal history. Because I think every country has challenging history, every family has challenging history. And when we revisit this and we talk about it and we share about it, that's really when we make the opportunity for progress. And so I would say I'm more interested in progress than justice. I don't necessarily feel like I have control over that. But if we can get to a point where history no longer stands between us but flows through us, that I think can be progress. So I think that's what I'm really pursuing. And I know progress is possible. I know it's possible. And it's progress isn't permanent. We have to make a commitment. If we want things to change, we have to make a commitment. And we'll take, as you know, 2 steps forward and then steps back. That's the way it is. But progress is possible.
I like that phrase, the progress flowing through us, because it goes counter to anything that is evident in a society that controls. A society, sorry, that controls does things in the best interest of those who are doing the controlling, to sometimes the um, way beyond disappointment, but discomfort and disquietude and occasionally punishment. And I'm being a little bit sarcastic with the occasionally, of people who are undeserved with that treatment.
So I agree with you, and I think that strong writing often contains juxtaposition, right? So we have, the love of power on one side, and then we have the power of love on the other side. And I find that with these topics that I'm researching, those contrasts and those juxtapositions are always there. But do they always have to sit, opposing each other? Or sometimes can there be this flow and this back and forth? Can they shine light on one another? And that's when I think it's really interesting. And strong writing, I believe, always has juxtaposition and contrast. I mean, it's one of the oldest devices, right? Like Beauty and the Beast. And but I do look for that in the topics that I choose to write about. What are the contrasts here?
Now, we define hero in a lot of different ways in our society and in many societies. And historically, we've defined it in many ways. What's your definition of a hero? Are there traits that come to being a hero? Are there certain people who are heroes to you?
Oh, there are so many people to me who are heroic, and I say that because I think a hero also takes on for me, not just someone that you look up to, but a mentor quality. And I believe even in reverse mentorship, Joe, I believe that, we often think of a hero and a mentor as someone who is older than we are, who might have more, experience in this certain field. But I believe in reverse mentorship, where an older person can has so much to learn from a younger person. And so the hero is for me someone who is generous enough to share, and that's not always easy. And when I say that in the books that I write, the main characters are teenagers and they're heroic. They have fierce hearts and really embrace the force of life and the power of love. And they exhibit that. And that is heroic. I think that capacity to love, which is not always easy, I think that's heroic. And so I'm looking for I'm more interested in young heroes and young mentors.
I really think that what you're saying makes so much sense. And I like the idea of the reverse mentorship, because we can't ever think that youth is folly and that maturity only happens for adults. I have had experiences with students over my career, and I can tell you that some of the kindest, most gentle things that have ever been done, I've experienced from 12-year-olds. When my sister passed away, 3 12-year-old girls wrote a poem, drew some pictures of angels, and as 12-year-olds are known to do, they don't know how to deal with situations that aren't exactly the most fluid. They knew they were doing something nice, but it was not something they were used to doing. It was hard for them to accept. So I remember them running into my room, popping this on my desk, and then running back out again. And when I read it, I was in tears. So
I've had similar situations to that. People have often asked, "Oh, what is um, one of your favorite responses from a young reader?" And actually, there was a classroom in another state. I live in Tennessee, in another state, who read one of my books, and the teacher gave an assignment to research me. And as the students were researching, you're putting in my name, and they found, my mother's obituary.
oh my
And
gosh.
the students realized that it was fairly recent. And the teacher later, after, told me, she said, the students, Ruta, they said, we have to stop. Instead of researching her, let's write to her. And they didn't know where I lived. It just said, it gave the city that my mother had lived in, where my parents lived. And I get this card, Ruta Sepetys, and the city name, Tennessee. Do you know the post office? It made its way to me. And inside was this card saying, we are from classroom 10 and we read Between Shades of Gray. And we were so taken with the mother character, and we began to research and found now that you've lost your mother. And we just want to say that we're thinking of you. And all these students signed their name. Joe, oh my gosh, I clutched that. It's something that I never, ever would have expected in writing. Again, as I said, writing these stories, thinking that it's about other people, but yet now this incredible exchange is happening. And I believe in reverse mentorship to the point where sometimes I put together focus groups when my publisher's launching a book with teenagers and say, okay, here's the marketing plan. What do you think? And they say, you're never going to reach us. If we're your demographic, you're never going to reach us. They're wise, they're patient, and they can be great mentors.
We as a society, I think, have to do a little bit more in terms of acknowledging what kids can and can't do. The gentleman who was my mentor many, many years ago when I started teaching, Dr. Joseph Burns, I still can hear him saying to me, Joe, you need to be wise enough to give your students all the opportunities to write, all the opportunities to perform well, make sure they can find the materials they need. And then you need to have one more bit of wisdom. Know enough to get out of their way and be there if they need guidance, but stand aside if they don't. And when they need you, they'll be there. And when they don't, well, then maybe you're doing your job better than you even thought. I've never forgotten that.
Such sage advice, such wise advice. And now you know that your students, you see it on a daily basis, how how incredible they are. Deep thinkers, deep feelers, such emotional truth. Yeah.
Have you found that people come to you with storylines to say, Ruta, I know that this exists. I haven't seen anything about this. Would you write this for me?
Yes. And as you can imagine, and as the listeners can imagine, sometimes the stories are wildly inappropriate, Joe, and things I could never. I was at an event once where a woman came up to me and said, do you see that woman over there? She thinks she's my sister, but she's really not my sister. And I want you to be the one to tell her. And I thought, oh my goodness,
Gosh.
no, this isn't. And she gave me the whole historical background, which was fascinating. But I said, no, that's not my story to tell. But then there are other times, again, going back to young readers and students, it was the students in Spain who asked me to write about the dictatorship of Francisco Franco. And they explained that when Franco died, that the country was fearful of being plunged into another civil war, and they adopted what's known as the Pact of Forgetting. They agreed to forget their history, and as a result, their parents and grandparents didn't speak about the dictatorship. And I said, oh, well, my goodness, I can't write about this. I'm not Spanish. They said, well, you'll find a way to write about it. And do you know, my way to write about it was as a young American boy who comes to Spain and sees from the outside in what is going on. And so, yes, sometimes it is the readers. And I always want people to let me know. Just today, I posted on social media something about my catalog. I was like, what part of history would you like me to write about?
Now, I know that to be a good writer, you need to be a good reader. Stephen King and about 1,000 other authors have said that. Who do you read?
Oh, I read a wide combination of things. I read, right now I'm reading a lot about Saint Teresa of Avila. I'm reading nonfiction about the Battle of Britain. I read all sorts of personal development books, and then of course books by my peers. I read a lot of academic texts. And in my research, I read, academic papers, and I note their sources, and then I seek out those books as well. But if I'm going to just for what I say a guilty pleasure read, I would say I'll go back and read an older author like Daphne du Maurier, like Rebecca. Or, she wrote Rebecca, she wrote The Birds, and sort of this Gothic mystery kind of sense of history.
It almost sounds like a dessert.
Yeah.
It's a little way to get distracted.
It does feel like a dessert. I've never thought about that, but it does, because I do so much research reading that when I read purely for joy, it does feel like a dessert. And it's such a treat. And there are authors like Meg Rosoff that when she publishes a book, I wait until I have an entire day and I want to read that book in one sitting. That's my favorite way to read a book is to try to get as much, read as I possibly can in one day.
Now, if for some reason you weren't writing for a living, I know you were in the music industry before this, what would you be doing?
Something that involves research, without a doubt. Whether that would be working, in journalism, not writing myself, but doing the research to support, or working even when I lived in Los Angeles, worked with some television companies, doing the research that's necessary for the TV stations to report on these stories. I love research. So, and I think it's just that quest to discover and uncover. And, my friends often ask me if it's my childhood fascination with Nancy Drew books, with Nancy Drew as this detective. And to be honest, writing historical fiction is like being a bit of a detective. You interview people, you hunt down clues, you try to find lost information.
For those who hope to become writers themselves someday and maybe even have a modicum of success, what advice do you have for them?
I will not ask them, I will beg them to give themselves the courage to fail. Especially these days, I find that young writers and new writers are so worried about failing. If you give yourself permission to fail spectacularly, and if you understand it's only a draft, this is not the finished book, it's only a draft. When you it's so liberating to give yourself that kind of permission to just write crap. And that's what I tell myself. There's no writer's block then because there's no pressure. And no one's going to see this unless I want them to, unless I ask them to. So give yourself permission to fail. I would also say that read widely. If you are, let's say, trying to write in a fantasy genre, yes, of course, read that genre and understand what that genre is about. And let's say world building. But I want you to also read in other genres. I want you to read poetry, as we said, to get a feel for rhythm and flow. I want you to read perhaps a thriller to get a feel for pacing and suspense. I want you to read literary fiction to get a sense of voice. Read a Toni Morrison book, to get a sense of that voice and how you might articulate that for for the piece that you're working on.
What your advice is saying to me is, in effect, cross-train yourself. As an athlete cross-trains, they're telling student athletes, do not play one sport, play multiple sports, because you pick up different skills in different sports and your overall performance will be enhanced. You're making the same advice to writers.
And, I didn't realize that. That's I should have, that you've expressed it perfectly. And don't think that just training one muscle group is going to provide the results you want. No, it won't.
Now, I'm sure that there are many who are listening today who would like to follow you on social media, maybe reach out to you for appearances or consultations. Would you share your contact information with us, please?
I would love to, because an author has nothing without readers. I really, truly feel that way. And I am so fortunate to have, have a wonderful career that I enjoy so much. And that is because of the readers. And I don't take that for granted. So they can find me on Instagram at Ruta Sepetys author, on Twitter and Facebook at Ruta Sepetys. And my website is rutasepetys.com. And if you want to, if it's an easier link, historyishiding.com will take you right to rutasepetys.com. Yes, and I'd love to hear from you there and chat with you online. So yeah.
Ruta Sepetys, thank you so much for taking an author's journey with us today. I have to say that your commitment to being a champion for the underrepresented whose stories are seldom told is both admirable and inspiring. Your parents have raised a wonderful daughter, someone with a very kind heart and a sense of nobility. I want to salute them for that. They have to be commended for those efforts, and your entire family, because the people we become is most often a byproduct of not only those who raise us, but those who are around us and influence us on a daily basis.
Thank you. You're so right. Sometimes the families we build can be just as strong or stronger than those we're born into. So for those who are listening who feel like, they have a built family, that's just as important. And thank you so much for those sincere compliments about my parents. I'm very, very fortunate to have a really wonderful, wonderful family, and I don't take it for granted.
On behalf of our listeners, I want to wish you the best of luck as you continue to meet your mark in what I am sure is going to be a continuation and a very bright future with success, but most of all, with an impact. I think that's where the key is.
Thank you so much. The journey continues.
Yes, indeed. Well, that concludes our journey for this day. Tune in again for more conversations with more authors of interest. For An Author's Journey, I'm Joe Pizzo. Have a wonderful day.